That's a good question, because I'm not sure that I've got any formal qualifications to talk about good governance at all. I've never studied it, never really understood the structure of it, but I think good governance is one of those things that you know when you see. Good governance is, you know it when you see it. Bad governance is something, you know it when you see it. I probably divide my professional life between my time as a journalist and then ever since I really thought of myself as a journalist gone bad, but I became a lawyer. And you look at governance and good governance and all the structures of governance in very different ways as a journalist and as a lawyer. When you're a journalist, you are serving your readers. So it's very much a job that puts you in the public sphere and in the public eye. And one of the things I think about being a journalist is this. People assume that the media have a lot of power, and they do, but it's important also to remember that the media don't have any more or any less power in terms of access to information than an ordinary citizen. They don't have any particular rights to demand information. They've just got to go out and ask questions and rely on gossip and leaks like every other citizen, in the country. And so, as a result of that, journalism was often a very frustrating exercise when you asked information about, from politicians or public servants or people that you would expect to account, and they didn't respond because it suited them not to respond. You couldn't compel them to give you information. You couldn't demand it. But what you did have was you had the power of the pen, and you could publicize the fact that people did not answer your questions. You could publicize the questions that people refused to answer. And in that way you could expose people to popular scrutiny. People who read the paper or listened to the radio or watched the TV and began to ask their own questions. Why is this person not answering this question? Why has this person done this? Why has this person done that? So then I became a lawyer, and when you're a lawyer, you're in a much different environment. You're then dealing all the time with the structures of power. You are in the courts, you are dealing with or lobbying government, you're competing with other people. And what you're paid to do is get a result for your client, to improve the position of your client. So you're either doing that in court, when you're suing somebody or defending a writ, or you are trying to get something out of a regulatory body, or you're challenging the decision of a regulatory body. Why else are you going to employ a lawyer at all and pay his fees unless that lawyer is trying to get something for you? And I think my exposure to good governance as a lawyer has taught me the importance of good governance, certainty, stability, rule of law, all of those things to investment decisions, which are critical to economic growth. And they've also taught me, I think, that good corporate citizens are served by good regulation. Transparency, fairness, logic, rule of law all suit good corporate citizens. If you have bad regulation, which is arbitrary or whimsical or corrupt, you're unlikely to get the best results for the public welfare. A level playing field is best, because a level playing field allows the best competitor to ultimately succeed. Yeah, the myths. Well, I think probably, if I were to think about good governance, and again in a very informal way, I think probably the four elements that I would identify are democracy. You've got to have genuine democracy, because democracy means equal participation. Everybody's got to participate in, I guess, the discourse on how their society is made up, and everybody's got to feel as though they are part of that. It's when people feel marginalized or they feel that they're not being listened to that you have instability, turmoil, possibly even violence, and we've seen that even in Fiji. You've got to have transparency. People have got to know about the things that are important to them. They've got to know what their government is doing and the reasons that the government is making the decisions that it is making. As a lawyer acting for a client, I once said to a government department, "You're making a decision for my client based on a policy. I want to see what that policy is. Show me that policy." And they said, "Well, we can't possibly do that because it's secret." Well, why is it secret? If you are a government department and you are making a decision based on a policy, that's a policy that belongs to all of us. And that's why that policy has to be transparent. And if you think about it, there's no reason why, a government department that is exercising its responsibilities properly and responsibly shouldn't be able to expose to everybody the criteria on which it is making that decision. That's transparent. That's fair. I think inevitably you've got to have accountability, and accountability means that if you've messed up, if you've made a bad decision, if you've made a corrupt decision, or you're just incompetent, you've got to account for it one way or the other. The people may call for your head, and you may have to resign. You may have to change the way that you have done a certain thing or exercised a certain policy or made a particular decision. But scrutiny means that you are accountable. You change and you improve, just like every other employee. Let's not forget this. Politicians and public servants, they are our employees. It's our taxes that pay them. They're there to serve us. And I think politicians and public servants often forget that. There's a website that I go to every so often. It's a website in the United Kingdom. It's called theyworkforyou.com. And what it has got on it is details of every member of parliament, what they earn, whose corporate jet they took a ride in, who is contributing to their political campaigns, where they visit, where they go, because that's all information that ought to be in the public eye, that ought to inform the public, about what drives a particular politician, why a politician might be advocating this particular course of action or that course of action. So democracy, accountability, transparency, those are all things that I think roll pretty easily off the tongue. But the last one is rule of law. Everything's ultimately got to be underpinned by rule of law. Because while democracy, accountability, transparency, those are all things that I think are quite easily translated into popular accountability, sometimes that also has to be underpinned by, I guess, technical scrutiny. Popular scrutiny is one thing. Transparency ensures popular scrutiny. Democracy ensures popular scrutiny. But sometimes you have to scrutinize things at a somewhat more technical level. And that's the role of the judiciary, particularly where democratic institutions may not deliver the right result. And I see later on there's a question about whether democracy and good governance are always compatible. I don't think they are always compatible. So you need something, I guess, that sets the standard. And rule of law driven by an independent judiciary helps to do that, helps to set, I guess, the iron rod of law that goes through everything. And when you think about it, all of that's based on our fundamental human rights. The law ultimately comes back to that. And those fundamental rights and freedoms that are encapsulated United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And so ultimately you've got popular scrutiny on the one hand, and you've got, I guess, the more technical judicial scrutiny that's encapsulated in rule of law. I think probably, and here's something that comes out of even our experience in Fiji, since 2006. We have a military coup, apparently to resolve a constitutional crisis, although it's the army that seems to have created the same crisis that it allegedly resolved. And then they act, or appear to act, decisively. We're going to sack this person. We're going to demand that this person get this. We're going to make this happen. And everything appears very decisive and very determined and very quick. And that form of government is attractive to people for a while because it looks like things are getting done. It's only as more and more people are subjected to that sort of arbitrary decision making, and more people realize that in the name of getting things done, their rights have been trampled on, and decisions have been made that are not necessarily, the right decisions, that form of government starts to just wear a little bit thin. When Hitler came to power, he was very popular because he made the trains in Germany run on time. That was the thing for which he was very, very popular for a while. And after 10 years, we discovered that Hitler's form of rules had a few side effects. Germany was a smoldering ruin. And, that's an extreme version, I guess, of how this so-called decisive leadership, which is not really decisive leadership, it's just dictatorship, under which one person makes a whole lot of arbitrary decisions which suit him or her, ultimately produces, a very bad result. And although our situation is not quite as dramatic as Hitler's Germany, we are in a situation now where our long-term governance and the institutions of our long-term good governance have been severely undermined. You think about an independent public service, you think about an independent judiciary and the perception of independence. You think about all of those permanent institutions of government that should remain there and should be independent as politicians come and go. Now, they've all been politicized, or their independence has been severely undermined, as a result of an undemocratic and unconstitutional government that pretty much does what it wants to do.
Do you think that good governance can exist under dictatorship?
No, I don't. Because dictatorship means that dictators are not prepared to accept scrutiny. And most importantly, they're not prepared to subject themselves, to an election. What keeps democratic leaders accountable? Ultimately, it's fear. It's fear of the people. It's fear of what the newspaper will say about them and make them unpopular. If you don't fear losing power, ultimately you don't worry about being accountable because you don't feel the need. You do anything you want.